if it did, it should be streaming here. Okay, so still think it should be here. Is that thing recording at all? Yeah. Okay, so I've been screwing around on here, just kind of playing. What I wanted to talk about was actually how to clean a bong. And when you look at that bong, you can see that, there's some resin up there in the corner that this hasn't gotten to yet. So that was a little feedbacky. So this is the Canamag, and this is a rare earth magnet on the outside, inside this wand here, and then there's another rare earth magnet that's coated with plastic so that it will not scratch your bong, and it's very powerful, quite powerful, and so it'll scrub the interior of your piece. But this is the formula that you use to get the results that you're seeing there. And this only takes like 2 minutes, so it's a lot faster than what you're used to. But I wanted to talk today, let me put that kind of back and see if I can make this bigger. So that's a pretty standard bong. As a matter of fact, it is this bong right here. So it's, you can tell this one's clean. I cleaned it with Mile High Cleaner. But this is the most common bong there is. Out of all the ones that are out there, 80% of them are this style or design in use. I mean, there's a lot of people that make glass, but So I wanted to talk about the bongs that aren't that great. And this is an example of them. This is one that a friend of mine got for free, not for free, for marrying his wife. It was actually a wedding present. But there's a problem with this bong. And actually there's several problems with this bong. And it's problems that a lot of bongs have, because people haven't thought about fluid dynamics. Fluid dynamics not only works with water, but it also works with air and how air moves around. So it's actually part of fluid dynamics. One of the things that you've noticed when you see a bong like this, there is always a brown line right here. So it's brown from here up, and it's very dark at the water line, and everything above the water line is brown, but below the water line it's clear, and that's because of the way smoke adheres. And what ends up happening is, if you don't have a way for the smoke to get out, and the only way for it to get out of a bong is to turn it upside down or inhale it. Okay, and that's, obviously you're not going to turn it upside down. So what I'm talking about here is smoke is heavier than water. I'm sorry, smoke is heavier than air. The problem with that is, as you take your hit and there's any kind of smoke left inside here, you set the bong down flat, and all of that smoke is just sitting there slowly getting absorbed into the water or onto the walls, which is why you have these layers and layers of brown up here around this level, but it's clear down here. And that's why it's at that water line straight across, because you've set the bong down. So that's where we get most of the resin that attaches to the walls of a bong. Well, this one has a dead space. There's an opening down on this level for the main intake, where you're pulling in the smoke. But then it has a percolator, and above that it has a second percolator. So in between here, there is never a time when you can access that well and actually scrub it. Now, that may not seem like a big thing, but think about this. Germs and bacteria grow in that kind of thing. And if you clean once a month, you have 30 days of bacteria and germs building up. I mean, if you rinse it out, that's all well and fine, but it didn't clean it. It didn't make it stink that much less. I mean, obviously it made it stink less, but as soon as you got finished rinsing it, you probably still stunk. And that means that you're smoking through bacteria that are still growing in that section, okay? And that's pretty important. Because if you can't access that and it's not getting cleaned out on a regular basis, like every day, I mean, if you smoke every day, you need to clean your bong every day. That's kind of how that works. If you've watched those CPAP commercials where people go ahead and say, hey, yeah, I've got this cleaner for my CPAP because, I didn't really think about it, but that's a warm, wet environment, and germs are going to grow in there. Well, yeah, they do. They recommend you clean the CPAP every day. And that's just air and water. That's not smoking something right through it that's turning black. That's not tarry resin. They're telling you to clean that every day just for the germs. And if you're only rinsing this thing out, you ain't cutting it, dude. I gotta tell you. And when you use the isopropyl alcohol, if there has ever been a time that you've used isopropyl alcohol and it has still left brown inside there, and you smoked out of it anyway, not only did you not clean the bong out completely, but now you were inhaling the fumes of isopropyl alcohol, which is made from a fossil fuel. It actually can be made from several sources, but they're all fossil fuel based. Isopropyl alcohol, I mean, it's a VOC. It causes a lot of damage. It's one of the major contributors to poor indoor air quality, which is more likely to kill you than you think. I mean, it's actually pretty bad stuff because we try and trap heat or cold in our houses to keep, when it's hot out or cold out. So the whole idea here is the fact that isopropyl alcohol is toxic, and you kind of know that. So when you sniff the bottle, it irritates your eyes, nose, and throat. Well, it's also doing some damage to your lungs. And it may not be much, but you're not as susceptible as grandma with her COPD or little Timmy that's crawling around on the floor where these things settle, just like it's settled, smoke settled in here, because isopropyl alcohol vapor starts off heavier than air. But it'll eventually get kicked around and, released into the environment where it turns to ground level ozone. And ground level ozone kills 1 million people a year worldwide. So that's some serious shit, and that's why they have ozone alerts on major highways in big cities, or, they post it on the news, ozone alert today, don't drive, because that's fossil fuels, and that's what's polluting our planet. So anyway, back to bongs. So here's my big bitch about bongs. When you take this hit, and I know this bong is broken, I'm going to use it for something else sometime, but when you take a hit at a diagonal, because the stem is going down into the water, and that's a diagonal here. And that's an easy way to hit, right? That's the right way to hit. You're doing that. So that puts the water level at this kind of an angle. Okay. So think about this. If you have this bong and you fill that up to where it just covers, which is all it will allow you to do, it will drain back down if you get too much. But you put in, if you get up to the black area, it will drain anything above that back down. So if you tilt this thing, you then have a problem where there is the water line is right along there. Okay, so it's on this kind of angle here where you've tilted to take your bong hit, right? And so the pressure of the water down here is much greater than the pressure of the water up here. So air, fluid dynamics again, is going to escape out of the closest port right up here. And it's not going to be the big full bubbles you want. It's the little spitty bubbles that you don't want, because those are the ones that fly up and get on your lips and in your mouth. So bongs like this are actually inherently a problem unless you do the bong hit straight up and down. And that's not easy. That's actually a kind of a pain in the ass. So doing a straight up and down hit like that, or your face over it, you're actually almost torching your own face when you light the lighter, because your face is completely over it. So that's not good. But that's how almost all bongs are made. Even if you do ones with the percolators that are a sheet of perforated glass where it's just got holes through a thin little layer of glass, that again, as you tilt, the heavier the water is, the harder it is to pull a bubble through. And you know that because if you've got, a stem that goes all the way down into the corner of this, it hits differently than a stem that stops at the 2/3 of the waypoint, because it's the farther down it is, the heavier the water is, the more it takes to pull the bubble through, which makes for a hearty hit, a full kind of hit. Whereas you get to the smaller bongs, or bongs that are chopping up the air so much, they end up going ahead and making these spitty little bubbles that aren't really a good hit. So my personal preference is to not have any percolators at all, because if you think about bongs and what you're trying to do, the whole idea behind them was to not have ash come up into your mouth from smoking a pipe. This makes sense because bongs, and when you smoke a pipe, you're going to get black tongue. But when you smoke a bong, the ash is much heavier than the smoke, and it will actually fall down into the water before it ever will rise up, especially if it's being jostled about inside a bubble. So there's virtually no way any ash can get up into your mouth or into your lungs after passing through just one layer of water, just doing single bubbles. Okay, that means that percolators aren't all that necessary in comparison. A lot of people say, yeah, it cools the hit, but that's not actually what's happening. If you think about how particles work, and exothermic and endothermic properties, that is, whether or not it holds in heat or whether it releases heat. Actually, let's switch. But anyway, endothermic and exothermic. So as the any particle, it's kind of a relationship between its mass and density and things like that as to how long it will hold heat. In an example, if you had say a BB, a musket ball, and a cannonball all in a row, and you heated them each up to 900 degrees, the BB will be cool within seconds, the musket ball will be cool within minutes, and the cannonball will be cool within hours. That's how the different things are. Well, taking those three things into consideration, smoke particles are in comparison the size of the BB. Water molecules, if you were to take a hand sprayer, they are the size of a musket ball. And in comparison, farther on up, there's bigger things like the cannonballs. I mean, chunks like the cannonball. So the ash is more like the cannonball, where even though it's a light and fluffy thing, it's big and dense, and it will actually hold just a little bit of heat, but that's the stuff that falls instantly into the water. But the smoke particle is so tiny that it dissipates its heat almost instantly. And you can actually prove this by a real quick little experiment. Is if you were to take a squirt bottle, a spray bottle that mists, and fill it with the hottest water that you can handle, or it can handle, and put it about the distance from where the smoke would be starting, where the heat is at, travel all the 6 or 7 inches down here, back up here, that's a good 24, maybe more, 24 inches. Well, hold the spray bottle 24 inches away from your hand and spray it with that super hot water, and you will find that it's cold on your hand because all of that heat has dissipated. Now remember, that's the bigger size particle. It's in comparison the musket ball rather than the BB sized. The smoke is the BB size, and it would hold heat even less time than the water molecule or water droplet from spray, which would hold heat for a certain amount of time. You can tell where that's at if you squirt it, you get closer and closer, and it'll be about 5-6 inches away to where there's still any kind of warmth at all from that, 200-degree water. It's dissipated that heat almost instantly, which means something like a regular bong is going to cool the smoke very quickly, and that's not what you're actually having as the harshness. What you're having as the harshness is the density of smoke. So follow this a little bit. If you have a smoke bubble, so you've taken a hit through this bong, it's passing down the stem, it gets to the end, and instead of breaking up into 50 bubbles, imagine it just being one bubble. Okay, it comes out in a single bubble, bloop, and you get your hit. Now, the amount of dirtiness or transition of smoke particles into the water, causing it to get dirty, is only happening at the surface area, which is the outside of that bubble. And if you have a bubble that is a certain size, any size, it has a certain amount of surface area, but if you split that bubble in two, you increase the surface area. Okay? And if you split that again, you increase the surface area again. And increase it again and increase it again. So if you've got, these percolators that, especially like those perforated percolators with the tiny holes in the glass, they tend to go ahead and break it into tiny little bubbles. Well, imagine that original bubble that I said right there, now all being filled with tiny little bubbles. So there's, 100,000 tiny little bubbles inside this bloop of air that came up, of smoke that came up. Well, it's where that surface area is at that the smoke particle is transitioning into the water. The more you split it up, the more surface area you have, the more it transitions. You end up getting less smoke because it's the smoke particles that are going into the water that you actually want in your lungs. And it's the density and kind of harshness of those smoke particles that make you cough. So you have a bong that dissipates the density by breaking it up into higher levels of surface area. You just get a lesser of a hit, and it costs you money to turn your water brown. And that's kind of the way it is. But I will admit there is a definite reaction to that. And I think it's twofold. I'm not sure on this. I haven't done any experiments. Everything else I've told you is just basic logic. But I think what's happening is a twofold action. It's easier to hit a single percolated bong. You have to develop a certain amount of suction, and that suction, it could be a small amount if it's a tiny bong with very little water, because we talked about the weight of the water down on the stem making it slightly harder to pull the deeper it was. Well, the more you have doing that, the harder it is to pull as well. So if you're pulling through multiple percolators, you have to generate a higher level of vacuum in your lungs. And as you create this higher level of vacuum, for some people it actually creates a tickle effect, which will make you cough as well. But for most people, it's actually better than the part way, you take a little, you have a little bit of pull from a small bong or a low water level or something like that. It kind of hits you differently than when you try and pull on it hard, and it coupled between that and the fact that you are getting a less dense smoke. It's actually does have a very good cooling effect. I mean, I don't really believe in the percolators because I think it just does waste pot, but I think it's also the good transition between the regular bong hitting, I can take any kind of hit, the cooled off effect of, oh, well, I'm getting to the point where my lungs don't appreciate that harshness. And then finally onto like vapes and dabs, some dabbers to massive hits. But doing dabs is going to be less harsh on your lungs, and doing vape is going to be less harsh on your lungs, and things like that. So it's a step-by-step transition. And so, is there value in percolated bongs? Yes, there is. Is there a smart way to make the percolated bongs to the point where they work correctly when you actually hit them? Because, like I was saying, if that percolator is straight up and down, it works perfect and is, works its best, its optimum. Same way with that percolator. But if you take your hit, you're hitting it this way, and you could have a very low water level comparatively where it's going to bubble just out of that top spot. And it's going to do spitty bubbles rather than good, solid, heavy-duty blub, blub, blub. So, again, this is all just stuff that I have opinions about. Some of you may argue with this. Most of what I've said is all factual based. I mean, it's really not a debatable kind of thing. But the whole idea here is the fact that bongs are pretty basic. This one works one of the best. The reason why almost everybody has this kind of bong is because when you use it, it actually becomes a better bong by tilting. And that is your most comfortable way to use it, is that way. So this is all logical and makes sense. Why don't we have glass blowers that use fluid dynamics to figure out how to create a better bong? Personally, I want to have one that allows for a carburetor, and it would be a large hole. I mean, we're talking the size of one of these ice catchers, to where it went down with a tube into just above where the water level would be. And that's how you know what your perfect water level would be, is because this tube comes down, and as it sits there as in an operating position, it would be just above the water line. And the reason for that is so that you don't create turbulence by, when you pull out the stem, when you pull out the bowl at the end of your hit, it's still bubbling through the stem, which creates turbulence as the water is blubbing, and so you don't get a good line of smoke coming up this. You get smoke that fades in color to where there's less and less to it, but there's still some there. So, what was I going to go? But if you take the stem out, it goes, and the air just goes, the smoke goes straight up. It's like clears the bong fast and instantly, and leaves very little behind. But that other way, where you take out the bowl, it leaves a little smoke behind all the time, which is, again, back to why your bong gets dirty. If you've got a little smoke left in the bong, it's going to sit on that level, even if it's stuff that you can barely even see. If you do the technique of take the stem out and blow through that, or just blow through the stem in the bowl, whatever, blow through it and look up, you'll see that at the top of this, there's little smoke that comes out of the top. And that smoke is the stuff that would either absorb into the water, turning it smelly, or adhere to the walls, and that's where you get the layer. It's clear all the way up to the water line, and then above that it's very brown, getting lighter and lighter as it goes up. Well, that's a big indicator that, we're doing this kind of the wrong way. The fluid dynamics are not really working. So if we did have a carburetor that had an air down here, so you could cover it with your finger, however way you want to grab it, it'd be in the best location, but it would start at the very bottom, just above the water line, and clear all the smoke instantaneously. That's how they used to make them back when I was a teenager. That's quite a few years ago. So, anyway, I think that's about it. I'm going